we go, the lady tells us it's being recorded. So for tonight's session, if you get hold of a blanket, some padding for under the seat, we'll be starting in a cross-legged meditation type position. So if you've got a folded up blanket, or perhaps you've got a block, they're great to go under the seat. It's nice to have a lot of lift underneath the sitting bones. So I'm going to go for a block. A blanket would do, that would suffice. A bolster, and we need a strap. So there's my strap. So a strap for this practice, if you've got a strap to hand, it's always good to have a strap to hand. And as far as I know, you may need 1 or 2 bricks. 1 brick will suffice for our wide-legged forward fold. So yes, so tonight's session is to do with the latter 3 niyamas. We've been working through the 8 limbs of yoga. So the progression is through the ethics, then you move through the asana, which is the posture practice, then you have the breathing practices, then you have sense withdrawal, and you move towards a state of meditation, which is a state of absorption. So we're working through all those elements, and we're at the 4th session, which is the last 3 niyamas, which are observances. And we dealt with, last week we dealt with sauka, which is to do with cleanliness, whether that's an outer cleanliness or an inner cleanliness. It's often to do with the outer and then it reflects the inner and vice versa. And we looked at contentment, which is santosha. So we did those last week. Tonight we've got 3 lovely niyama. We have tapas or tapa, which is to do with heat and ardor or commitment, and heat is reflective in the concept of maybe suffering. So it's quite interesting when we think about the impact of the heat, which can be akin to suffering, and how that can be helpful for our practice. We've then got Svadhyaya, which is self-study, and self-study is obviously study of our reactions, our internal monologues, our nervous system, and is an ongoing practice within yoga, Svadhyaya. And then we've got Ishvara Pranidhana, which is surrender to the divine. So within all religions, you have these aspects of the ethics, and these are big themes. In terms of surrender to the divine, that can be practiced within our yoga in terms of surrender to things like gravity. You know, why could that not be divine? That is nature's way, that is the intended, this is how we exist on the earth, and other aspects of acceptance and surrender. So it doesn't need to necessarily link up with God with a capital G. It can be something other. So it's quite a wide perspective in a way. So we'll be looking at those 3 elements within our practice tonight, and the reason why I wanted to start in this meditation position, which is our sukhasana, which is obviously a very important part of yoga. Many of the asana are to develop the flexibility to sit for long periods of time, to be still. So when we're sitting in our meditation position, I want you to ensure that your sitting bones are off the ground in order for the iliac psoas to therefore lengthen. We hold a lot of tension in this region of the body. So we're allowing for these limbs, the femur, to rest and relax out and away. And if we have this height, it means that we do not sort of slouch into the lumbar. So we don't necessarily want to come into a flexion movement. Got a little bit of space, so you should be able to wiggle backwards and forwards. So you can move forwards, an anterior tilt and a posterior tilt. Some space there. We want to make sure that we're not moving too deeply and not creating too much pressure in the knees. So come into a position that feels comfortable. And if the knees do not like sitting like this, you can kneel. That's also an option with some height underneath the buttocks. So we're imagining that the spine is nice and tall, coming up from the pelvis through the lumbar, which is naturally in lordosis, through the thoracic, naturally in kyphosis, and the clavicular spine, which again is naturally in this curve here, this light lordosis, coming up to the crown of the head. So with that sense of grounding through the sitting bones and lifting up all the way up through these 3 erect areas of the spine, being aware of the fact that we are not like a pole, we are not straight, there's a sense of movement within the body, and the shoulders move away from the ears. So let's just allow for the chin to move down towards the breastbone, coming into a Jaladhara Bandha, which is the lock around the throat, just easing out the back of the neck muscles. And actually, I'm going to invite you to bring the hands to the back of the neck and just run the hands all the way up the back of the neck here. And you'll be moving up through the grooves either side of the clavicular spine. And then you've got the atlas joint right at the top there, which is where the skull positions itself. And you may be able to feel into a ridge around the bottom of the skull, which is called the occipital ridge. And around this area, you've got a lot of lymph nodes and areas that feel really quite tender. It's a really key area of the body. It's considered to be one of the 3 heels. You've got the heel of the skull, this occipital ridge, the heel of the pelvis, and the heel of the foot. So just massaging into that area of the body can be really quite wonderful for release. So we can just massage down the side of the neck there using your fingers. Just giving your neck some attention. The neck becomes so tight throughout our daily lives. It just needs a little bit of TLC. And then release the hands. And we're going to drop the ear. So the left ear comes down to the left shoulder. Or indeed, if you want to come to the other side, that's fine too. If you can surrender the head, fully allowing the head to rest to the side, the shoulder here. And there is a tendency, and you can see it in my body as much as anyone else's, this reaching up with the shoulder that automatically comes in. Just allow the shoulder to rest away from the ear. And if you want to bring the hand to the side of the head, create some feedback, some weight resting into the head, that can be really helpful to open up along here, along the sternomastoid. This muscle becomes very tight, and when it becomes tight, it impinges on the cranial nerve functioning. For instance, the vagus nerve that runs all the way through the wandering nerve, down past the heart and the digestive organs, all the viscera within the abdomen. So let's see if we can ease out that tension. Now drop the chin forwards and release the hand, rolling to the other side. Again, noticing if the shoulder wants to reach, allow that shoulder to roll away, down, away from the ear. And I invite you to bring your hand over to rest on the side of the head on this side. Just pivoting the chin backwards and forwards. And being aware of how this side feels compared to the other side. So a little bit of Svadhyaya, self-study here. Really simple things. Paying attention, noticing how the body feels in any given moment. As when we do things quickly, in our daily lives, we override sensation. We're often not aware of what we're doing. So this is really a practice of mindfulness, dropping the chin forwards, which is said to protect the telomeres within the brain. So these connective end areas of the synapses. So to slow down is really helpful for our minds. It's a preventative thing, really. And let's drop the forehead down and come into flexion, rolling into the back of the pelvis. We're coming into a C shape here, complete flexion movement. And then we're going to inhale as we bring the breastbone forwards, come into extension, allowing for the shoulders to touch back around the back of the spine. Exhaling to come into flexion. And inhaling to come forwards into extension. See how much movement there is while you're sat upright. Perhaps there's less movement as you're sat upright compared to in all fours. Exhale. Are there any areas that do not want to move? And then we can take this movement now into a spiral. So we're spiraling into the bowl, basin of the pelvis, and creating this sense of a pestle and mortar. So we're rolling through the spine, and that movement can be small, or we can take it slightly larger and take it into the thoracic. It might be the case that you then bring the breastbone forwards And then maybe you exhale the breastbone backwards. How much space is there within the spine today? And then as you come back, let's go back in the opposite direction. Scooping round, creating spirals. There are many spirals within the body, and this is probably the largest spiral of energy. The Kundalini Shakti comes up from the basin of the pelvis up through the spine. Coming through the center. Now this time you have an option, depending on how your legs are, you can take them out to the side and they come into a V shape. Clasping the hands. Now you can do this with bent elbows. It depends again how much you want to take this action, the spiral, into the spine. Or if you want to do something slightly stronger, so you have more abdominal action taking place, you straighten the elbows and scoop round. And again, it is yogi's choice depending on how large you want to create these circles. Now, I would suggest if you're taking some abdominal work here, maybe there is a sense of tapas, of heat, of ardor, of commitment to the integrity of the spine here. And let's go back in the opposite direction. So if you were going anti-clockwise, you can go back in clockwise fashion or vice versa. Scooping round, stirring your cauldron, or mixing up some golden milk with turmeric and ginger, depending on what you want to visualize tonight. Lovely. And then come back. So we're now going to take the spine into a lateral extension. So bending the knee and placing the foot inside of the thigh. Now, if you're still on the props, that's great. Otherwise, you can roll off the prop. We're going to stroke the hand to the inside of the straightened leg, feeling into that space, and maybe bring the hand over the head to create a C shape. And just notice what changes when you bring the arm over here. You may find that the shoulder creeps up and it's not such a pleasant sensation. Now, some would say that that's an element of tapas, to be with that sensation. Some may say that you should surrender the body into this movement. Or if you're following a sense of self-study and you want to adjust and make this more comfortable, perhaps you might find that the hand could be brought to the back of the lumbar, the sacrum, maybe the back of the hand meeting the back of the pelvis, and see how that changes things. So that might be preferable in terms of sensation. And you can move in between those points, noticing how your shoulder mobility may change as you move. Or perhaps it stays the same. And just notice that within your body, as our bodies are all different. Breathing into the side body here, into the ribs, and allowing for the intercostal muscles to open and close and expand with the breath. Lovely. And then let's reach up towards the ceiling and lift as though we're pulling ourselves upright. We're going to come to the other side. So extending the left leg out, or indeed the right, depending on which side you are. The other leg bends in and the base of the foot comes into the inner groin, grounding down through both sitting bones, stroking that opposing hand alongside the inner seam of the leg and noticing what occurs here. Now you may find that you can rotate around the breastbone as you lift up through the arm. Just explore this arm without forcing it into a space that it doesn't want to go into. And then explore how it feels to bring the back of the hand onto the tailbone. How does that change things? And if there's an overstretch inside the leg, if you're hypermobile, you may want to bring the leg in or bend the knee slightly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make that adjustment. Inhaling and exhaling. And the more that we use this state of the witness in terms of our Svadhyaya, our self-study, the more we are able to modify and adjust, whether it's on our yoga mat or off our yoga mat, depending on what our needs are at any given moment. Breathing into the side body here. You feel the rib cage expand on the inhalation. And maybe a sense of surrender on the exhalation. On the inhalation, a sense of expansion. And on the exhalation, a sense of surrendering down into the earth. A sense of letting go. As we reach up with one hand, lifting up through the side body. And we're going to bring now both legs in front of us into Dandasana, staff pose. Quite a strong asana to come into at the beginnings of our practice. And I'm aware of the fact we haven't prepped the back of the legs, the hamstrings. So bring the hands down to either side of the body. Depending on your anatomy, some of us are going to be able to plant the hands quite easily, and others may not be able to reach the palms down. So I can't actually reach the ground with the block underneath my buttocks. It doesn't matter, just make those observations. The toes lift up towards the ceiling, and we're nice and erect in the spine. Now, if it's available to you, we're going to come into Paschimottanasana. So I'm going to come over to a side view. We're coming into a forward fold. Now, those knees can be bent, and we're hinging from the hips to come into a forward fold. You'll notice that my toes are twinkling up towards the ceiling, dorsiflexion here. And it doesn't matter how much you come forwards. You may want to exaggerate the knees and come into a forward fold with the torso like this. So you have some options there for your Paschimottanasana, your forward fold. And it's really key to keep those knees soft. There's no need to lock the legs down. Coming into a forward fold, breathing here. And if you've got the knees bent and you're coming into a resting place, you've got this wonderful sense of a constriction around the front of the body to allow for the back body to breathe and open and expand. This will help with a sense of surrender. Whereas Paschimottanasana in its full form is a very challenging place to surrender into. Breathing, surrendering, releasing into your exhalation, and lifting the torso back up again. So we're now going to take both legs over to one side and work with swiveling into the hips. So you might want to take the weight into the sitting bones and rock onto the side. So this is a really good exploration in terms of mobility in the hips. And you can bring your hands down to help you, if you like. Otherwise, you can challenge yourself and keep the hands in the heart space in Anjali Mudra to explore how it feels to move the legs from side to side. Such a simple exercise. This is one that my tutor introduced to us. And this in itself, it's very simple but very effective. Swiveling from side to side, and then depending on whether you've got your hands into your chest or the hands down, we're going to swivel round into all fours. So coming into all fours, the hands come underneath the shoulders, the knees directly under the hip points, coming into this tabletop position. And this is an excellent place, again, to use a sense of self-study, of Svadhyaya. Now, which areas do you need to adjust? Do you need to adjust your wrists? How are your fingers and hands feeling? It's likely they feel very tight. Spread through those fingers nice and wide, and you'll get a sense of suctioning under the palms. And that will help protect your wrists. So you're pressing down the tips of the fingers as though you're pushing against a wall. So these fingers are wide. Lovely. And then bring your attention up to your shoulders. How do they feel this evening in this practice? Do they feel free and easy, light, or do they feel tight and dense? And then draw your attention down through your spine to your lumbar. Now, how is your lower back? You may want to begin to rock and roll through the spine here. Now, easier said than done, but can you locate the area of the spine and roll through the hips? Now, this is a very subtle movement. I'm actually creating circles through the hips here, scooping round and then scooping round in the opposite direction. And what do you notice here? Now, for me, I feel that there is a strain around the front of the abdomen. due to a rather tight muscle. Maybe you're feeling sensation around the back of the pelvis. And if it feels very tight around the back of the pelvis, I want you to bring the hips back and come into a little flexion. And that will open out the back of the pelvis here. So we've all got a tendency in the spine, and we can become more aware of this when we come into our all fours. Now bring your attention to your knees. Do you need padding under your knees, or are you happy to experience this as it is? So the tops of the feet flatten against the floor, and it can be useful to have a look at your feet. So some of our feet will be like this, and some may be flat. So you may feel that the toes are like this or like this. And that really depends on how much kneeling you do in life. So if you're kneeling like this in your daily activities, it's going to be very easy for the feet to extend. But if you're not used to doing this, it's less likely. So coming into your tabletop, let's move into a flexion, allowing for the head to nod forwards. The crown of the head is heavy, and the back of the breastbone lifts up on exhalation. We inhale to come through neutral and exhale to come into extension. Now, does your extension exist mainly in the lumbar, which is very common? Can you encourage that up into the thoracic, which is an area that becomes so rigid and gets very tight in later life, or throughout life? And we're going to exhale and draw head and pelvis. So you're shortening the distance between the two. Inhale. Beginning to inhale through the nostrils here. Be aware of whether they are blocked or whether they are free and open. And exhale to come through your scared cat. Such a simple thing to do, but so effective at helping us hone our attention to our bodies. We can do it without thinking. We can just override sensation and do it quickly. But what we're doing here is that we're doing it slowly and moving into each space as effectively as we can to explore our bodies more mindfully. Super. We're now going to lift the right leg off the ground, bending the knee and come into circles within the hip. Dorsiflexion in the foot. And we're scooping the knee round as though we have chalk attached to the knee to create some circles. Now you may be moving in one direction. Let's do 5 on one side. You can do 10 if you want. Fully exploring the outer reaches of this external rotation within the hip. And then as you come back through center, we're going to come back in the opposite direction. And you'll notice how your weight may adjust to one side. So dumping into one wrist more than the other. See if you can adjust that. Can you adjust through your attention? Can you adjust the weight that may be dumping through the side and the opposing side where you're lifting the leg? If that makes sense. And then bring the knee back down. Adjust your all fours position and scoop with the knee on the other side. Keeping the hip point down, it may want to flare, adjusting as is necessary through the arms and exploring the external rotation within this side of the hip. How does this hip feel? Now, I would say that this hip for me feels maybe more tight than the other side. And I don't start making judgments on why that might be. I'm just noticing. As I know that this will change. Every day there will be some changes within the body. Maybe some days we'll feel stiffer, especially if it's the morning. Some days we'll feel freer. Sometimes our energy is going to be heavy. Sometimes we're going to feel light. Make sure you're scooping around in the opposing direction before dropping the knee down to the side. Now, option here, because we created a bit of heat in the hips there, some tapas, some effort. You can come down into child's pose, extending the arms away. If you want to come into child's pose with your bolster, you can bring the bolster underneath the body, coming into some back breathing. So it's lovely to have something to hug onto, to have a little bit of reciprocity. And it's very likely that we're not all going to be able to come down onto the ground with our forehead down in child's pose. And this is as effective to come into a forward fold, resting the cheek down on one side And then turning the head to rest the cheek down on the other side. And you can widen the knees apart, come into a slightly wide leg child's pose. And this is always available for rest. You can always come back to this position. This is always here for you. Otherwise, we're going to move that proper way. If you want to stay there longer, that's absolutely fine. We're going to come back into all fours, spreading through the fingers and come into our bird dog. So our alternate limbs lifting. So we're going to lift first through the right arm and the left leg. Inhaling, reaching, gazing down in between where the hands would be, so the neck is long. And exhaling to bring the limbs down. Inhale, come to the opposing side. And there is a sense of heat within this posture. But there's also a sense of surrender. And a sense of self-study when we have to adjust the hip if it lifts. And we notice when the breath stops, if we're concentrating, you're more likely to hold your breath. When you notice that, adjust rather than ignoring it, rather than overriding what the breath is telling us. Now, if we're shaking, come back into child's pose. Make this as effortless as possible. There's an interesting kind of tug of war taking place between all of these aspects of our practice, because you could say that the tapas, the self-study and the surrender to the divine are opposing forces, but they're not. They work together. Inhaling to lift limbs off the ground, breathing, extending through the limbs, and exhaling to drop them back down again. Super. Now we're going to tuck the toes under. Now you could go into broken toe Vajrasana, and that's an excellent opportunity to work with tapas, with heat, with the breath and the exhalation that surrenders us through this foot posture. But we're not going to come do that today. We're going to come up into downward dog. So bringing the hands up to the side, the fingers come out about 30 degrees. We're taking the weight into the knees, or the legs rather. So the weight goes into the legs. And if you're not used to coming into downward dog, you can come in and out of it, taking the weight and then just drifting those knees off the ground to come up into your downward dog. Now, I really love to explore downward dog with the knees bent. So let's inhale, lifting up through the toes. Exhale, thinking about straightening. Inhale, lifting heels off the ground. Exhale, bringing heels down. Inhale and exhale. And we're surrendering the breastbone down towards the earth, surrendering the head and the neck. So the neck and the head are fully free. And as we bend into the knees, we're taking some weight into the thighs. And sometimes that can be quite arduous. There's a little bit of tapas, a bit of suffering going on in the quads, which is good for us. And allowing the head to dangle freely. Lovely. And then we're going to bring the knees down and come into kneeling. So we're coming into Vajrasana, hero's pose, and you can use some padding. So if you've got a bolster, let's use the bolster and pop it underneath the hips. Now, how does that change your kneeling position? And if you found kneeling without any props prevented the feet from flattening, maybe the feet were like this, you're more likely to be able to lengthen out in this position. So coming into Vajrasana, we're going to work with the arms and work towards a pranayama called Viloma pranayama. So let's inhale, bring the arms back. Exhale, bring the arms forwards. Inhale, we're moving the arms back behind the spine. Exhale, move the arms forwards. Inhale and exhale. We're going to slow this down. Inhaling. How much space is there in the shoulders to bring the arms back? Exhale. Inhale. And you can take this much slower than the pace I'm taking. Depends on your lung capacity. And as you work with the arms in this way, we can extend and lengthen through the breath. And this is going to be instantly calming to work in this way. Now, if there's any tension coming up, it may be that this is too slow for you and you may need to work faster. Now, the inhale, as we bring the arms back, may be slightly shorter than the exhale. And as you exhale, can you exhale through the nose? And maybe you begin to make the sound of the ocean breath, Ujjayi, internally. Knowing that on the inhalation, the diaphragm flattens and the cavity opens to create space. And on the exhalation, everything draws inwards as the air rushes through the nostrils. And we're going to take this to the opposite direction now. So we're inhaling the arms up in front, exhaling behind. May not be as much space behind. Inhale. Exhale. And keep doing this because we'll be exploring something called Viloma, where we complicate the breath somewhat by creating steps within the inhalation with pauses. And that has quite an interesting effect on the nervous system, and hopefully you will feel that. So we're now going to bring the arms to the side. We're going to inhale, pause, inhale, pause, inhale, pause, inhale. Is there any more? Pause. And when you get to the top of the inhalation, I'm going to exhale. So when we come up on the inhalation, it's like coming up on steps. So we inhale, plateau, pause, inhale, pause, inhale, pause, inhale, pause, inhale. There may not be anything at the top here, but if you can carry on, that's great. Exhale when you need to. So when you get to that full capacity without any strains, that's really key that we do this in a relaxed fashion so we don't create any intra-abdominal pressure. Pause, 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 relax those shoulders, pause, exhale. Now if you're used to working with the diaphragm, if you sing and if you swim or you practice pranayama or play a wind instrument, this may feel easier to access. If you're not used to working in this way, it may be that a sense of anxiety comes about. And if that is the case, come back to a more comfortable place with the breath. Maybe only pause twice, exhaling. And you'll come into your own pace here, inhaling, 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 inhaling. Exhale, and that's a lovely long exhalation that's going to lengthen potentially and drop down to a base, which is a pause in itself. Inhale, 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 inhale. And there's a peak, a Pukabaka, a pause at the top of the inhalation there. Exhaling, and you may notice a pause at the end of the exhalation. So those are called Kumbakas in yoga. Inhale, and exhale. Inhaling. And when you work with your own lungs, with your own body here, you just notice the effect that it has on your mind state and your energy. Do these pauses touch into a sense of stillness? And you can come to a finish with your Viloma Pranayama or carry on. And if you're coming to a point of stillness, I would like you to just observe how that feels around the front of the temples and the face, and come into a sense of meditation. So we're just coming into stillness, positioning the back of the hands onto the thighs, and coming into a sense of awareness or consciousness, just noticing where your attention is. Now, you may or may not feel like that pranayama made a difference, made some changes on your state of being. And as you sit here, just notice the weight grounding down through the pelvis or the feet. And a sense of lightness moving up through the torso and the head. How do the shoulders feel? Do they feel easeful? Do they feel tight? Now I find with the Viloma practice that you can just come and move straight into another posture or asana, but actually it's really helpful to have the time to absorb these pranayama practices. And then, if you like, we're going to move into Ardha Matsyendrasana. You have the option of staying here in this meditation position if you prefer. Otherwise, we come into half Lord of the Fishes, which is also considered to be a meditation posture, with one of the knees bent so the foot comes in towards the groin, as we did earlier, and the other foot comes over the thigh. Now, if the sitting bones are not happy to rest down equally, we can either prop ourselves up on a little block or bring the foot in front of the sitting bone directly in front. So you have some options there. So make sure that your base of support is grounded, and you want the foot to be fully grounded on the floor rather than just on the side of the foot, if that makes sense. So you've got this very solid base of support, which should feel quite easeful. And we are grounding down through the sitting bones, lifting up through the spine, knowing that we are fixed around the pelvis and the lumbar as we exhale and rotate into the upper leg, into a closed twist, into our Ardha Matsyendrasana. And the hand can place on the outside of the knee, or you can bring the back of the arm alongside, or you can come into the wavy option, which is quite nice, depending on where your knee is in space. And we're inhaling and lifting up through the spine and exhaling to rotate through the thoracic. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling. Allow for the belly to soften and open. Exhale. Belly draws in. Inhale. Belly moves away from the center. Exhale. Belly draws in. And again, there is a sense of tapas, of heat, taking place within this spinal rotation around the abdominal region. And on the next exhalation, we're going to rotate and just come through an easy twist an open twist on the outer side. Again, one hand can just be placed behind the buttocks and we can wave or we can wrap. There are a few positions there. You want the shoulders to feel really relaxed here. Inhaling and exhaling. Super. And as we come into our central position, you may find that your legs are happy to stay where they are, or we can come into Gomukhasana legs. Now, normally there would be lots of prep for these positions, so just be aware of that, but I'm avoiding that because of the niyamas, the sense of heat, of tapas, of self-surrender and self-study. This may be available to you, or you may be in your Ardha Matsyendrasana, or you can come into the kneeling. Okay, so with Gomukhasana cow face pose, the knees are about stacked. There's quite a strong internal rotation within the hips. And if you are in this strong internal rotation of the hips, how does that feel? There is a sense of tapas, of austerity in the hips. How much can you surrender into this base support? What are you aware of? What's your body telling you? How useful is where you are? Where can you make this more useful, more free? It doesn't have to feel uncomfortable, or it doesn't have to feel painful. There may be a sense of discomfort, but how can we allow ourselves to surrender into that slight discomfort? So we're going to bring the strap now to come into Gomukhasana arms. Lifting up through the same arm to top leg, we're going to scoop that arm, and the arms have worked a bit. So how do your shoulders feel? I don't want you to just wrench yourself into this Gomukhasana. It's a really good one to be aware of the shoulders, because if you're like me, I spent 10 years forcing my arms into a position, which may or may not have been a useful thing to do. So we want to feel into Gomukhasana arms, and the other arm comes to the back region of the spine. And again, I want you to see how free and easy you can feel. Can you feel comfortable? Can you relax into this space? Or does it feel like there's a lot of effort? Maybe there's a lot of tapas. Maybe there's quite a lot of suffering taking place. And what can we do with our breath to settle in? So there's fine lines between all of those aspects of what is helpful, what is not helpful, what is pleasant, what is uncomfortable. And those boundaries of those borders of sensation are going to be changing from moment to moment. So it might be the case as you breathe here that your hands may want to creep closer towards one another. Just notice how this is within your body. You may feel it around the front of the arm that is above the head. You may be feeling it around the front of the shoulder. You may be feeling it in the hips. You may be feeling it in all of those regions. And let's extend the lower arm out and reach out the upper arm, opening up the wingspan. We're going to swap over by leaning through the sitting bones to come to the other side. Firstly, we're coming into Ardha Matsyendrasana. So this leg is now coming in towards the groin, and we either bring the foot in front or over to the other side. So you're using a sense of sensation to come to the opposing side, and we can get sometimes a bit confused about where the legs are in space. But if it doesn't feel familiar, like you've been settling into it for a bit, you've probably come over to the other side. So coming into Ardha Matsyendrasana with your variable options, and the foot is grounded, so it may want to be in front or over, depending on your body. Grounding down through the sitting bones, lifting up through the spine. Exhale into your closed twist. Relaxing around the shoulders. Inhaling, lifting up through the spine. Exhaling and rotating. Inhaling through those expansive ribs, so the intercostal muscles can open and billow. Exhale, and that sense of drawing inwards. Inhale, belly softens. Exhale, belly draws in. And on your next exhalation, coming through the midline, so we're coming through neutral and coming now into an open twist. And again, you can put the hand on the outside, or you can bring the elbow in and wave. Just resting here in your open twist with that foot grounded down. And breathing through center, we come into our Gomukhasana legs, wherever you need to put your legs. So it might be that they're still in Ardha Matsyendrasana. It might be that they're here. Or you can explore bringing the knees over one another. And it's key to remember that it really doesn't matter where the limbs are in space. It's just about the awareness that we have of our limbs in space and the sensations and how we work with those with the breath. So the hand is taking hold of the strap for the upper knee and leg. We lift the arm up overhead, exploring the shoulders, no forcing, and drop the strap and the hand behind the head, coming to the other side. Now, how does this side feel compared to the other? This is definitely my least favorite. We always have preferences. How does this feel within the body? How much can you relax into this Gomukhasana, cow face pose? And you can wonder to yourself how much cow is in this pose. Does it feel like it has any relevance to a cow for you? It's an interesting one. It's like Ardha Matsyendrasana, which we were just exploring, which is half Lord of the Fishes. It's one of the really quite ancient shapes. So these seated shapes are much older than the standing forms of yoga and asana. And then inhaling, release the hands away from the body. Wing out those arms, fully explore the shoulders here before we move the legs out very carefully. Bring the knees to the side and then swiveling to bring the knees to the other side. You might want to move your strap away. Swiveling so we can come into all fours, moving our props, coming into all fours and taking the weight into the legs. So we're going to transition into our downward dog to come up to standing. So we're taking the weight into the legs, moving the sitting bones up towards the ceiling, and bring the right foot forwards first to come into low lunge. So if you need to bring the hand to the foot to do that, please do. And we're not coming into low lunge in a low lunge release sense around the hips. We're coming into a high low lunge. It just means the knee is still on the ground. If you want to bring some padding underneath the knee, please feel free to do so. You want to feel like if you touch your toes under, you might be able to lift yourself off the ground. Little thing there, little challenge. We will be doing that. So just explore into this feeling here. Inhaling, exhaling, drawing the arms back. Inhale, make sure that tailbone is grounded down in case you get too busy in the lumbar. Exhale. We're in a low lunge. Inhaling. With Ujjayi, so you've got this sense of the breath coming through the nostrils. Ocean breath. We're going to tuck the toes under as we keep breathing. And what would it take for you now to lift up through that back leg? So you might want to bring and just do that once. You don't want to do that too much. The limbs in slightly in order to come up, but you want to keep a bend in the back knee, keeping the tailbone down, inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling. Now we're thinking about the weight going into the front foot. So we're going to meet the front foot with the left leg. How does that feel? And then take that right foot back, still breathing, bringing ourselves down into our low lunge. Inhaling, exhaling. So there's a bit of movement going on here, taking our weight up and off the ground. Inhaling, exhaling. And if your toes are not already tucked under, as you breathe, you might want to take the hands back to lift. Bending the back knee. Focusing on good alignment of the spine so we're not moving into the lumbar. Now this is quite strong. Inhaling, exhaling. Strong in the back leg, I think you'll find. And then as we move the hands, as we breathe, we're going to take the foot forwards and meet into Tadasana, mountain pose. I'm just going to adjust the frame. So as you come into your mountain pose, noticing those 4 points of the feet. This is where it's difficult for me to actually get my body in view. And notice where the knees and how the knees are. So if the knees are locking, soften the knees slightly to come into your Tadasana. So you're almost in like a Wu-Wai position, which is like a Qigong. So the knees are bent. The pelvis is soft, grounded. A sense of lift around the pelvic floor, pelvic diaphragm. The arms are resting alongside the body. And you're simply just being here. So we're going to take the foot out to the side to come into Goddess with the toes coming out to the sides and the knees bent. The knees are tracking the feet. And we take some weight into the quads here. Just be really cautious. The knees are tracking the toes. We don't want to create any tapas in the knees, just tapas in the quads. Okay, no suffering in the knees, just suffering in the quads. So coming into a very safe goddess, where the pelvis drops down, the gravity allows for this movement down, the tailbone just drops down, so we're not sinking back like this, it's just simple, and your sense of pelvic floor draws up, the knees track with the toes. Lovely. And we're just going to allow for that weight to settle down into the legs, with the hands resting to the side. Surrendering into goddess. And let's inhale, straighten the knees. Exhale, dropping down through the legs. Inhale to release. Really make sure those knees are happy. A little bit of discipline with ourselves here. That awareness of what the knees are happy to do. Exhale. Inhale. And just while we do this, I want you to consider a lovely thing that I came across the other day in an audible called Radical Wholeness. So it's a proposition here. Intelligence is an emergent phenomenon. Can say it. Intelligence is an emergent phenomenon. That means it's not necessarily just is, it's an emergent property. And that's talking about slime mold. Intelligence is an emergent phenomenon. Slime mold. Okay, so I'm imagining that you're feeling the tapas within the thighs now. So we're going to bring the toes in towards center and transition to the ground. So lifting up through the heels. Do what you can with this to bend the knees, taking the weight into the thighs. The hands come into Anjali. And we're going to bring ourselves down into a little crouch position. How does that feel to balance on the toes here? And let's see if we breathe. Can we lift up onto the tippy toes? How does that feel? Before you come back down again. And then we take the sitting bones down onto the ground, allow for the feet to come together like a book, and the knees come out to the side. So very lovely little Baddha Konasana, cobbler's pose. If you've got your bolster to hand, bring the bolster in, pop it to the forehead, create a little bit of padding, and you've got a very restful Baddha Konasana. If you need to make any adjustments, please do. I'm going to bring the screen closer so I'm less far away. So coming into cobbler's pose, Baddha Konasana, surrendering the knees into, well, not into the ground, down to the ground, to the earth. And there is a sense of tapas, of austerity. I imagine you're feeling it. The self-study, the Svadhyaya comes in. How much of this movement is useful? Is it helpful? Is it unhelpful? Are there things you can do to adjust and modify that make this more comfortable? If you had two bolsters to hand, this would be a great time to put one bolster here and one bolster here. Come into the forward fold. Just for a moment. Otherwise, we're going to lift up through the spine and come into an inversion. And for tonight's inversion, we're going to be still with Vipariti Karini. Legs up the wall or legs up the sofa, whatever you have to hand, to come into this easy inversion, allowing for those legs to drop down into the pelvis, coming into a very simple but effective shape. So preferably you're resting your legs against a wall or something that's supporting you. Otherwise, there's a little bit of effort taking place with the legs up towards the ceiling. And here you are surrendering yourself into the earth. You use your Svadhyaya, your self-study, to explore how that is for you and what changes take place. And the tapas that you experience here, the austerity or the heat, is not so strong. But there may be a sense of suffering. And ideally, we would have longer within our inversion. And in your own time, if you want to bring the legs down, you can tuck the knees in towards the body and rest yourselves into Shavasana, into corpse pose. And again, corpse pose, it seems like an austere pose, but there is also sort of innate kindness to the fact that you are resting on the ground beneath you, which is generally fairly still. Another thing if there was an earthquake underneath you, and wouldn't feel quite so kind. But that solidity beneath you is very similar, in my opinion, to Ishvara Pranidhana, which is surrender to the divine. So the divine here may be the earth with which you lie yourself upon. So there is a faith that that earth will hold you. Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to the divine. So within the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there are some lovely threads of wisdom. And in terms of tapas, it says, the direct meaning of tapas is to burn. By the physical tapas of fasting, we burn our excess fat away along with the toxins our bodies have accumulated. By mental tapas, we burn all our old impressions. By verbal tapas, observing silence, we control speech. When we burn, we feel some heat and pain. We undergo suffering. So tapas also means to accept suffering. If someone suffers, he or she is blessed because by that suffering, some impurities are purged out. In order to make our minds clean and steady, we must accept suffering, pain, and poverty. It is even more beneficial if, at the same time that we accept pain, we bring happiness to others. So accept the pains of others, never lose by accepting pain. The more the pain, the more the gain. We should never run from it. I would just like to mention that in terms of sensation and pain within our asana practice, we obviously want to protect ourselves. So that's more of a mental tapas of experience. In our lives, there are hundreds of opportunities for tapas. Even a cloth must undergo tapas to become clean. What will the laundryman do with my cloth? Will he fold it, put some sandalwood paste and a flower in it, and give it back to me? No, first he'll soak it in boiling water with soap. Then he'll beat it every which way. Then he'll tumble and toll and squeeze it in the washing machine. After that, he'll dry it in a hot chamber and iron it. Only then does the cloth lose all its dirt and grime. It undergoes tapasya to become pure. Laundryman has no hatred for the cloth when he does all these things to it. He only wants to make it pure. So tapas, to accept a sense of heat, of ardor, suffering. And then you have Svadhyaya, self-study, which is also compared to the study of spiritual books. So it could be the study of scriptures, also any practice that is our own personal sadhana into which we've been initiated. And then Ishvara, Pranidhana. Our surrender to the divine. If Svadhyaya is our self-study, our observation, our ability to witness what we experience. Ishvara, Pranidhana is surrender to the divine or surrender to God. In the Bhagavad Gita, it said, do everything in my name, then you will get peace and joy. If we understand this, there is no reason even to read any more of these sutras. But some people might want something different, tastes differ. That's why the scriptures give different paths. So it is the suggestion that the dedication brings unending peace by purely having something to dedicate oneself to, so it doesn't matter what that divine entity is. And just for a moment longer in your Shavasana, the practice being a sense of the tapas, the adjustments that we make being a sense of the self-study, the Svadhyaya, and the surrender to that which is, whatever that may be for you, is the Ishvara Pranidhana. And then at the end of the following sound, begin to wiggle the toes and the fingers. And at the end of this perceptible sound, roll over onto the right hand side in a comfortable fetal position with no rush at all. Then you may want to bring the arm alongside the side of the face as you roll over to create a little cushion for the head. And allow for the side body to fully rest down into the earth. A sense of release being a sense of trust that the earth is there to support you. And then at the end of the following sound, if you're wearing glasses, you can take those off. We're going to come to sit in an upright position. Coming into a comfortable place as you move yourselves into the upright plane. With a sense of the sitting bones grounded, the three areas of the spine erect, the atlas joint and the head sitting on top of the atlas joint. And then to come to a close in the practice, let's bring the hands together to create some heat, some tapas, in its physical form. Really warm up the palms, and we're going to bring the hands, the palms to the eye sockets to create a little bit of feedback as you roll in to the inner and the outer, and then bring the hands to the mid-center around the third eye space, through the midline towards the heart space, bowing in acknowledgement of one another and the space in between. That may be your Ishvara Pranidhana. Namaste.